Fight fans, welcome to the PBC podcast, brought to you by Premier Boxing Champions with your host, Kenneth Buhari and Michael Rosenthal.
Welcome everyone to the PBC podcast. I'm Kenneth Buhari, and with me as always is USA Today Boxing Junkie editor Michael Rosenthal. First things first, we want to remember and pay tribute to all of those who have served this country and those who continue to do so during these times that we live in. I know that places are starting to open up and folks are slowly starting to come back out, but boxing fans are still in a holding pattern, and it shows in the news lately. I mean, it's been super slow for those of you who've been checking out every day like me. But a few things caught my eye, Mike. First things first, Floyd Mayweather is still training. I saw some video clips of him and Devin Haney working together. Mike, I love that combination. I mean, Haney's style is already similar to Floyd's because of the work he's done in the past with Floyd Sr. And he's got that strict diet and regimen that Floyd has as well. So I could see the two. I don't know how long this is going to last, but I could see the two working really well together.
Sounds like a good marriage to me. The young, talented guy like that. He's 21 now. And a great fighter like Mayweather, who just decided he wanted to give being a trainer a try. Perfect timing. I think Mayweather could have a lot of success with Haney. Although I'm guessing that, tell me if you think I'm wrong, I'm guessing right about now, a lot of talented young fighters are reaching out to Floyd. So I think he's going to have to figure out who he wants to work with, if he's assuming that he's serious about this. You sort of alluded to this. Interesting side note, Haney's not only worked with Floyd Sr., he's also worked with Jeff and Roger. So he's worked with all four of them. So he will have learned everything that the Mayweathers have to offer, I think.
Right, and it really shows in his style. He's such a disciplined boxer, and I see a lot of Floyd in him. I heard that Floyd actually reached out to him. I don't know how true that is.
Oh, okay.
But I heard something like that, which is really interesting. So it seems to me Floyd is serious about being a trainer, and obviously there's a lot that some of these young guys can learn from him. I saw Rolando Romero also doing some work with him. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of Floyd Mayweather, the trainer. Now, another bit of news I saw was that Canelo Alvarez says he's still looking to fight twice this year, even though he didn't get that May date. So he's looking at one fight in September, another in December. The September fight will probably be against Billy Joe Saunders. And then in December, he's likely to face Gennady Golovkin a third time. I don't know about you, and I may be in the minority, but I really don't care about a third fight between those guys.
That's subjective. I mean, either you do or you don't. I do. I like it, and I think that Golovkin certainly deserves it. I'll say this: I think the first two fights were inconclusive. Most thought Triple G won the first fight. Canelo eked out a win in the second fight. So I think just from that standpoint, I think it's probably makes sense to have a third fight, whether some people are interested in seeing it or not. And I don't think that Triple G's age should be a factor. I think he's still an elite guy, and I think he deserves one last opportunity. And that I think his chances are better in winning than some people do. So is it necessary? I don't know if it's necessary, but I think it makes sense.
Did you say his chances are better than what most people?
Yeah, I'll keep saying it too.
Yeah, I know.
Even after he loses, I'm going to say it.
I feel like Ronald Reagan. I'm about to say, there you go again. But, look, the reality is that even though I'm not too crazy about a third fight between the two of them, I'll probably find a way to watch it if it does happen. It just doesn't, intrigue me. I get the first two fights were good, but I feel like this one is taking place well past its expiration date.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from.
Maybe Golovkin is the same fighter he was. He doesn't appear to be the same fighter, and part of that is age. Part of that is Canelo dishing out a lot of punishment in that second fight. I can only see a KO win for Canelo here, but I guess my question to you, and maybe why this fight doesn't do it to me, is what does a win mean for either fighter, particularly Canelo? I certainly understand for Golovkin, it's everything. I mean, it's the defining win of his career.
Exactly.
Places him in the driver's seat. He's like a legend overnight, but for Canelo, what's the motivation for this?
Well, I sort of alluded to it before. I don't think that the first two fights were conclusive. A win for Canelo, particularly if it's a clear win, like you're suggesting that you think it'll happen. It proves that he was the better of the two guys, that he wins the series. I don't think that a victory at this point would have the same weight, because people will say that Triple G is an older fighter, wasn't as good as he was, but a win's a win, and he still wins the series. So I think that definitely helps his legacy. And as you said, a victory for Golovkin is just enormous. It would be the defining victory of his career. Enormously gratifying for him. Can you imagine how gratifying that would be for him?
Sure.
And it would leave no doubt about his greatness. I think he's a Hall of Famer now, but that would just put him way over the edge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he turns into a legend if he beats Canelo. And you're right. Look, for Canelo, to me, it's a lose-lose for Canelo. Like if he beats Golovkin, then he beats an old man. Who cares? Blah blah blah. I get it. Ultimately, when you look in history books, he's gonna come out winning 2 out of 3, and that does count for something. Now, if he loses, he loses
when
everything. If he loses, he loses everything. So I don't know.
He loses everything, but it's a big loss. That's a big
It's huge. Yeah, absolutely. Part of me wants to see him against some fresh faces like Caleb Plant, David Benavidez,
I hear you,
Andre, but just something different. But I get it. I also think some of those fights are probably unlikely. However, I will say this: I agree with you. Golovkin does deserve a third fight. Perhaps it's. I just feel like it's too late. But hey, the boxing fan in me will probably tune in.
Never know.
Yeah, true. You never know. Anything could happen. Now, something else that caught my eye in the news, according to his promoter, Leon Margulies, Cuban heavyweight prospect Frank Sanchez is ready and willing to take on the division's big names. Now, Sanchez is now trained by Eddie Reynoso, who also trains Canelo Alvarez. But he's a 6'4", 220-pound former cruiserweight, Mike. I mean, is he ready to step up, and can he become a world champion?
I'd say I don't know about the first part, but the second part, probably yes. I'm intrigued by Sanchez. I think he has a combination of skills and athleticism that could give a lot of people problems, not even the top guys. He's really skillful. He was a Cuban national champion, reportedly finished his amateur career with a record of 214-6. I don't know if that's accurate, but it's probably close, and that's pretty impressive. He knows what he's doing. I expected a little more from him in his last fight against Joey Dueco. Yeah, I was gonna try to get through that. Thank you, Joey Dueco. But I think Dueco's a tough guy with some ability. I do want to see a killer instinct from Sanchez, though. I didn't see it in that fight. And I need to see what happens when he gets popped by a big punch. He's got those skinny legs, which make me wonder. Maybe he needs to get a little bit bigger, just a little bit. I'm not sure. But again, though, I'm intrigued. I think this guy's got a future.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I really think a lot depends on how well he's able to take a punch. Although in his case, he's such a good boxer, he probably won't take too many. But he's going to have to outbox these guys at the top of the division. And while he's got the Cuban amateur pedigree, the impressive skill set, I still think prospects, particularly in the heavyweight division, should be moved carefully. It's a division where, more so than other weight classes, one punch can change your fortunes quickly in a good or bad way. And you need to maximize your potential to be ready for that moment so that the pendulum, swings in your favor. So in Sanchez's case, I think certainly he's capable of becoming a world champion, but they probably need to take their time with him. Maybe in a few more fights. I'm thinking like he could fight in a few fights, he could fight a Charles Martin, perhaps an Adam Konaski or Robert Helenius, but
I would rush him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All in good time. Now, one final bit of news which has been making the rounds. Several top promoters have come out to say, given these times and the economic impact of the coronavirus, fighters need to take less money or, at the very least, make the big fights if they want to be well compensated. Pretty bold statement, I would say. Mike, do you think it has merit?
Yes. The take that I have on this is that, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think the thrust of that was the latter part of what you said. I think the thrust of that was the latter part of what you had said. I think it's okay for these guys to make big money, assuming the big money's there under these circumstances. But if you're going to get big money, you gotta face tough opponents. I mean, a lot of guys now are making big money against second tier guys, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. I think that promoters, I don't know how they would do this exactly, but if promoters say, okay, you'll get big money, but only if you fight, worthy opposition, that's an incentive to fight tougher guys. That's what the fans want. That's what I want. That's what everybody wants. They want the best to fight the best, forgive the cliche. I'm not picking on boxers who definitely earn what they make. I just want to see good matchups more consistently, and maybe this helps.
Yeah, I would hope so. I think it's tricky, and I think it truly depends on the promoter's motivation for saying these kinds of things and how transparent they're really being. Maybe there's no other way, and if that's the case, I get it. I think certainly in this climate, look, the average person is happy to retain whatever job it is that they have. If they have to take a pay cut, then they'd rather that than to be laid off or furloughed. But in the case of boxing, while there may be some need for a kind of market correction, I think a lot depends on what the promoter's motivation is for saying that. If you tell the fighter, the gladiators who put their lives on the line every time they step in the ring against whoever, that he has to take a pay cut, and you're doing it because you want to ensure that your own compensation doesn't change, then I take umbrage. Then I have an issue.
I agree. The
that.
promoter's got to prove that. He's got to demonstrate that there's a reason for the pay cut.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, as always, it's probably, judged on a case-by-case basis. And I don't know if we'll ever be privy to those kind of details, but it's hard to say. From the outside, I think sports in particular right now, for the average person, they're sort of looking at it sideways. Again, these guys are making millions of dollars, but then again, it's because we pay to watch them, but a lot of people are suffering right now. Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how that shakes out, and we'll see what the reaction will be from all corners. Now, we've got a great show for you guys today. The one and only Nonito Donaire will join us. And also today's toe-to-toe segment is going to feature a debate on the legacy of one Iron Mike Tyson. We're also going to take a look at several notable PBC fighters and who we may see them square off against once boxing resumes. But let's start with our first interview, hailing from the great boxing state of Michigan and with his own rich fighting family tradition, the original Matrix, Andre Dirrell. Andre, first and foremost, how are you and your family doing?
We're all doing really good, exceptionally good, actually. We're staying away from people. We go to parks and sit out and, enjoy the weather and, do little family picnics to get that sense of normality. Other than that, we're doing really good. I have a baby due next month.
Oh.
It'll be our fourth, little Ali David Dirrell.
Wow.
Will be born into this world. We're very excited about that.
Congrats.
And I'm feeling really good about just my situation all in all. When it comes to training, I have a whole gym in my garage. And I tell you, it's top-notch gym in my garage, and I'm staying busy, and I'm in shape as well, man. So I couldn't ask for anything less.
That's great news. Have you been able to do any running and so forth aside from the gym? Any cardio, etc.?
So I have a problem with my knee that doesn't allow me to run like I so love to do. Running is my that was one of my things I did just to escape, and the issue with my knee is not allowing that, but I do ride my bike heavily now, and I swim a lot, and I'm up 60 laps in the pool now, so I'm excited about that. But that's the cardio I get pretty much. Yeah.
Wow. Now, does the issue with the knee, does it affect you at all in the ring as far as your movement?
No. I spar a good 12 rounds, man, and the knee is totally fine.
So it's the pounding of running that hurts your knee?
Yeah, it's the pounding of running. Just over time, I guess. One of my biggest mistakes was beating up my body and not taking care of it. I'll train for days. In fact, I love that process. And I would go home and lay out. Now I'm in the house. I have to work out. I'll stretch for a good hour. I'll get up in the morning, go do a new stretch routine. I put my legs on to compression legs on to flush out, and I ice when I need to, man. So I wish I would have started sooner, but I'm starting now, and that's all I can ask for. That's going good.
I'm just curious, does the swimming and the cycling, does that produce the same cardio results as running? Does it feel the same in the end?
Okay, so swimming is going to feel 30 times as worse as as running. Running becomes easy. It becomes a part of life. Like when you've done it for so long, I've been running since I was 10 years old, and 12, 13, I was already running 4 miles, and I usually run 6. I can do 10 laps in the pool and feel like I did, 100 laps around a whatchamacallit. So yeah, you're going to get that same cardio. But what people don't understand about why boxers run, it's mainly to lose weight. People aren't really doing it unless we have strength and conditioning coaches to take us to the track and run a certain routine, do sprints, run around twice as fast as you can, or get around in a certain amount of time. Then we do it for the sole purpose of getting the excess weight off, water weight, doing it the wrong way. You can it's all about your heart rate. So you can get your heart rate up doing drills on the bag, running in place, doing certain cardio. It can give you the exact same effect of running when you don't have to actually step a foot on the track.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk boxing. Last December, you ended a 21-month layoff with a 5th-round stoppage of Juan Cabrera. Did you feel any different at light heavyweight compared to super middleweight?
No. I mean, I did. No, absolutely, I did. I'm thinking you're talking about the fight. But no, I felt a huge difference, man. I'm walking around at 192 right now. I'm walking around at 192 right now. I'll be fighting 175. I can get down. I can, I'm walking around fairly comfortable, and making that weight for the first time in camp, it was a breeze, man. And I feel great not having to lose that extra 7 pounds. 7 pounds. And so, yeah, I felt a huge difference in just energy. I felt really good.
It sounds like you just grew out of the super middleweight division.
Yeah, I probably grew out of the super middleweight division, but based on how my career was going, I wanted to stay to prove a point, and I saw at that last Uzcategui fight that 68 just wasn't a comfortable weight for me. I probably should have went up a couple of years prior, but I know how to make weight, and I'm disciplined enough to get down, and I don't have to do it in a fast amount of time. But nevertheless, still having to lose that much weight probably just, caused me to burn muscle and things I shouldn't have to lose. So it was best I went up. I felt that last Uzcategui fight, me and Virgil had a hell of a camp, man. If I would have performed everything that we learned, I would have came out on top victorious, but I wasn't able to do that at 68.
Was there a specific reason for the long layoff that you'd care to share?
2 surgeries.
Oh, okay.
I broke my leg, fibula bone. I broke it playing soccer with my kids. And then my knee problem, I had surgery on my knee as well.
Wow. Good reasons for the layoff. Okay.
Yeah.
How's it feeling now?
It feels great. I don't eat dairy anymore, and that's that's a big cause of the inflammation that's going around in my knee. And then grain as well. I eat grain still. I do it on a every now and then basis, But when I stop eating grain completely, which I do in training camp, it totally goes away, man. Like I walk around with my knee brace just for a sense of comfort, but I don't need it. Even now I eat bread moderately, or grain period moderately, very moderately. So it's not something I have to worry about as of right now when it comes to inflammation, because that causes a lot of inflammation.
Andre, before the pandemic hit, did you have any fight lined up at all?
Al Heyman just had spoken with me on the phone. We had a conversation, and he was set to have me go every 4 months. We had he wanted me to get back into the groove of things and get up the right way so he can make those big fights. And that's what I believe will continue from this point on. Al has been really, really patient with me, and I'm really appreciative of that. So I believe that's what it into once boxing starts back up, man. We'll get back on that 4 month routine, hopefully, and 2 or 3 fights in. I'm looking for some big names.
That's really good to hear, man. Sounds exciting. Looking back at your career, I saw recently Paul Malignaggi. Uh, he said that you're the greatest fighter of this generation to not win a world title. Now, you did briefly hold the IEBF interim belt, I believe. But what did you make of that? Right. What did you make of that statement?
Man, that's something that ponders my mind consistently. I'm more confident in myself now because along with this pandemic, along with the things I've been through, the way that I train myself, not, along with any other coach, is allowing me to really, really get in tune with my mind, the boxing world, and how I want to display my talents from now on. I'm older now, so I have to be more efficient. So I'm working on efficiency, and I believe I'll definitely hold a title. It's a scary thought, but that's something I can't allow into my mindset. I believe the time will come, and I believe I will hold that title really soon. But funny, I just talked to Paulie Malignaggi yesterday. Over the phone. He's in Miami. I'm here in Boynton Beach, Florida, and he's doing really well as well. Like I told him I would love if he commentated a few of my fights moving forward.
Yeah, maybe that happens. Who knows?
Yeah, but that's a huge situation, man. I need that belt. I have all the talent in the world. I haven't lost it from how I heard the commentators talking about me in those fights. I know I still got it. My body feels great. I haven't been in a bunch of wars. So it's all about how I pick and choose my opponents and how I choose to fight, more importantly.
So is winning a world title still your main source of motivation?
Shouldn't it be?
Yep.
I'm in it to prove the critics wrong, prove the naysayers wrong, and to have the fans who were with me and then jumped off of the bandwagon want to get back on board. Will I accept them? Probably not, because of the simple fact that I have some loyal fans out there. I got people that's been with me since day one, reassuring me of my talents, my abilities, and that I do still have it. I mean, I still look good. Like when I tell people I box and they can't believe it, I'm such a handsome guy. I take care of myself. I talk well, I speak well, and I still hold those talents. And like I said, when you're not in a bunch of wars and in a lot of wars, I'm going to sit here and say I got beat up one time in my career, and I'm going to say that was my last fight, and that was because of the weight that I had to lose for that fight, man. I believe I was just missing some with Uzbataki, and he didn't beat my ass. I'm not going to sit here and say he just beat me senseless. The fight was actually better than I thought it was, but I wasn't in the right mindset for that. A lot happened at that time, providing no excuse. But I have a lot to offer, and I really want to prove everyone wrong, man. So there's some names out there I want to see under my belt, and I believe that they'll lead me right to that championship.
Andre, you fought some of the best super middleweights in the world. A lot of people thought you deserved the win over Carl Froch back in 2009. Yeah. What are your recollections of that fight?
It's true. It's true, no doubt. Even Froch knows it. Like, we can go back and look at that fight, and if we sat down with each other, he would have to, and he says he wants this round, I'll have to have him explain to me how you believe you won that fight. You know what I'm saying? Because round by round analysis, there's no way you can put that belt in Froch's hands unless we were in his backyard. Oops, we were in his backyard. You know what I'm saying? So October 2009, I was WBC world champion, ungifted. And I had to go with that, man. And I can look back at that and I can say I have been world champion. There's nobody provided the excuse of I moved too much, I ran too much, that can say I legitimately lost that fight. And if they did say it, have them explain to you or I or the world. They can't. It's more people telling me to this day I was a world champion in 2009. And I can take that with a lot of ease because I know it's true. I was WBC world champion before. I just wasn't crowned.
I was around during the Super 6 World Boxing Classic, I think it was called. For those who don't know, you were beating Arthur Abraham in the following year, 2010, when he punched you while you were down and he got disqualified.
Yeah.
You spent 21 months away from boxing, I believe, after that. What long-term impact did that have on your career, do you think?
It was a very telling moment. These moments right there, any boxer who's listening or who will hear this coming up, thinking they're going to have an illustrious career, it's going to be smooth sailing. You plan on going undefeated, and keep that in mind that you're going to be undefeated, But chances are that won't be the case. Chances are you won't have a smooth ride in this game. Everything will go as planned. You'll visit bumpy parts of the road, and you'll have to figure out how to climb those hills, how to navigate those crevices. That's a very difficult thing to do. But in those telling times, in those telling moments, is a character building opportunity to give you something to move forward in your career with. And that time apart, that was the first time I had to deal with adversity. It was a very difficult situation for me, and legitimately I was hit, I was hurt, and I couldn't continue, and people badgered me, and I didn't know how to handle it, man, and it hurt very much. But once I got over it, and once I realized that this is a part of the game and it'll come regardless, then I started learning how to deal with it, and I started categorizing these situations in my mind and putting them in places where I can open them up, bring them back out, and remind myself that I am worth it. I do have the ability. I can get it done. I've been through this, so this is nothing. It'll take you a very long way. Look forward to criticism because it's coming. And that was a character building moment for me, man. It allowed me to be the man that I am today. I don't want to take back anything that happened in my career. I am a guy who refused to regret what's happened in my career. Anything of what happened in my career. Only thing I regret is signing away from Al Heyman, but that was forced upon me by my uncle. And that was through love. I love my family. My loyalty to my family caused me to be unloyal to Al Heyman, and that's something I regret. And that's the only thing I regret. He didn't deserve that. No matter how much money I make, if I gave it all to Al Heyman, I couldn't repay him for taking that contract and re-signing me, man. It's
wow.
I'm just truly humbled by that.
Listening to you now share some of the experiences, you have so much to impart to some of the younger boxers. When it's all said and done, would you consider being a trainer of some sort?
No. I'm the type of guy who's going to give everything to boxing, everything that I have to every fight that I have, man. So I exclude a lot of time away from my family and look at my career. Like, a lot of people have bad things to say about my career, most probably, but I can look back and say I had an illustrious career compared to many, but giving so much and not gaining it in return, not seeing the flip of it, because unfortunately that's just how life goes. I'm not willing to run that circle up again and just stay in the same picture. I'm willing to take a different picture and travel that, road. Commentating is one thing I would love to do. Analyzing fights is something I would love to do. I plan on actually getting a YouTube channel and start analyzing fights. We'll see how that goes, though. I want the right things in place to do that. But I want to see boxing, or I want to be involved with boxing from another perspective, from another spectrum. So not coaching, not coaching. That's like doing it all over again.
Well, I like the fantasy fights idea, or analyzing fights, I should say, because one fantasy fight we analyze a lot is one that didn't happen, and that was between you and Andre Ward. Many believe that it didn't take place because you guys were friends. Was that the case?
Yeah. That wasn't the case. That wasn't the case at all, man. I was hurt. I couldn't continue. It was simple as that. Like, I'll take that to my grave. So anyone trying to convince me that otherwise, it's just not the case. I regretted it too. I wish I could have fought him as well. But I can't do that under, if I couldn't be 100%. Like, the thing with that is, because how my career went, we weren't even allowed to meet somewhere down the line. I didn't go to him and say, listen, I'm glad we didn't fight, or I wasn't in camp with him when I was training with Virgil, saying, man, we should have had that fight. We still talk about that. Like, we would have gladly met up if our path would have crossed, but it didn't. He continued to win, and I continued to stumble. So, like, that naturally gravitated us away from ever meeting, because just say he did it out of sympathy, because of how my career went. We talking about a guy with 3 losses, and I believe only lost 1 fight, which is Ukitagi. I beat Dirrell as well. Say that we did. He did decide to fight me. It would be a money grab fight. He'd be doing it out of sympathy for me. You know what I'm saying? Because we're friends. But that definitely wasn't what was stopping us from fighting. We understand that friends meet. And that's just the case.
Yeah. Now, how do you think the fight would have played out?
Of course, you see me victorious. Andre Ward is a very, very smart fighter. Say I took the L, I would have learned a lot. I could have took a lot with me. Say I became victorious. Andre, no. That was my son. Sorry. Say I came victorious. We would have seen Andre Ward with a defeat, and we would have saw how he handled adversity. We've seen him handle it many times before, though. Andre Ward is a very upstanding guy. Whether we fought or not, lost or won, we will remain good friends. A true friend wouldn't let something like that stand in the way, But I believe that that fight would have played out with us both walking out of it with a lot more gained, a lot more experience under our belt.
Andre, you come from a family full of boxers, and you're from Michigan, a state many would say has produced more great boxers than any other. What is it about Michigan, do you think, that makes it such a breeding ground for good fighters?
Typical situation, the grit. We go through a lot of stuff out there, man. Flint doesn't have too much to offer as far as there's business opportunities in every situation, but in the hood, no. And I'm speaking strictly from the north side, the east side, and the north side and the south side of Flint, Michigan. So, like, it's some people that say, "Oh, why would you, deem Flint, Michigan, a state, a mud city or whatever?" You know what I'm saying? You got to get it out of the mud. Well, that's from my perspective and from the people that I know. So it's very difficult to find a niche and stick with it when there's so many distractions in Flint, Michigan, man. Boxing is an outlet to where I can be violent. I can beat a dude's ass. And sorry if I'm cussing, I probably shouldn't.
It's okay.
If I can beat a dude up, if I can beat a dude up and get away with it, and brag about it, you know what I'm saying, and get notoriety from it, you're not getting that kind of credibility in a place like Flint, Michigan, not where I'm from, man. You got to do a lot to be accepted, and even then, there's people out to get you, So it's just having to. It's knowing the odds. It's knowing where you come from. You know what I'm saying? And then knowing the possibilities once you do get into something you love, man. So that's why I believe there's so many great athletes in Michigan, Flint, Michigan right now being produced. And they will continue to be as long as Flint stay in those shoes. But there's something about just having to get it from the mud that just gives you that sense of where you get up and then once you make it, man, we see why,
In conclusion, Andre, you had mentioned that you want to fight the best, or alluded to wanting to fight the best at 175. Are you targeting any fighters in particular, or other guys you'd like to fight in particular?
We have to give Andre Dirrell a place right now, and I'm in no place in light heavyweight right now. I have to climb that ladder, so I'm gonna let Al decide who he sees first. Like these going to be tune-up fights I'm talking. And then we move on to the upper echelon of fighters. I want to start with the names of Badu Jack, Marcus
Brown.
Yeah.
There you go. Marcus Brown, Gene Pascal, and it's a few other light heavyweights. I can't say them offhand, but I do know of a couple more few. I want those once these tune-up fights get out the way. I want to get this done in the span of 2 years. Because I won't be doing this at 40 years old. No way. 38, I really want to retire. So that's my aim, to retire at 38 years old. So I want to see those fights, get them in the bag, get that title, and chase one of the big names, man, which is the Russians that's running this damn business right now, man. And then I can make my exit. I would absolutely love, to fight Canelo, man. I have the style to definitely put on the show and come out with the victory. I'm not sure where he's at 75. I'm not sure if he's playing with Stan, but I know good and darn well my style fit his perfectly, man, and I can make a lot of big things happen there as well. So if he plans on staying at 75, then that'll be a dream matchup for me as well. Especially a closeout, man. I would love to close out with a big name like that.
We're excited. We can't wait to see you in the ring with one of these guys. Andre, thanks so much for your time. We wish you and your family safety and health, and look forward to seeing you in the ring again soon.
I appreciate it, man. I really do.
Take care, Andre.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Yeah.
You too. Good to hear from Andre Dirrell. He's been a fixture in the sport for so long. Looking forward to seeing what he can do at 175. We've seen how Jean Pascal has resurrected his career. Perhaps it's Dirrell's turn. All right, it is time for our toe-to-toe segment, and we're going to start with someone who has been on the news quite a bit lately, who may be returning for what we hope will be an exhibition, but may end up being something more. Who knows? I'm talking about none other than Iron Mike Tyson. This man has been making headlines since 1986, Mike. So I got to start off with this. What is the attraction after all of these years?
People gravitate to legends, I think, and Tyson's a legend. Look at Michael Jordan. He hasn't played for almost 20 years. ESPN does this documentary series on him, and suddenly everybody's talking about him again. They just love legends. Tyson records a few videos. He looks pretty good, and suddenly a time machine has taken him back to 1986. He can knock out Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, and Deontay Wilder all at the same time.
Jeez.
That's sort of the feeling that you get. But seriously, I think people see danger in Mike Tyson. I think that was part of his appeal originally. That's both in the ring, where he has so many brutal knockouts, and out of the ring, where he's had his problems. He used to be like a car wreck. People they crane their necks to see car wrecks. Now I think it's more about nostalgia, memories of a tour de force who captured the imagination of the world at that time. And the thought that maybe, just maybe, he can recapture some of what he once had. It's not going to happen, but I think in the back of people's minds, that's what they're wondering. Ironically, I'm not sure that's even what Tyson wants, but here we are.
Yeah, definitely. There's a mystique about Tyson that began with the vicious knockouts you mentioned. There's also that video game that endeared him to a generation coming up. I remember as a kid barely knowing anything about boxing. One of my earliest memories of the sport was of my family, my dad in particular, racing to get home so we could watch his fight. And I remember one night we were getting out of the car and a random stranger passes by and he says, "Did you hear what happened?" And my dad says no, and the guy is like, "Tyson got knocked out." And he said it like with the sadness of a guy who just like checked his bank account and had a negative balance or something. This guy didn't know my dad from anywhere, but that's that's just how huge Mike Tyson was. That strangers in the street would just randomly start talking about his fights. And you mentioned all the controversy outside the ring, so many incidents. I mean, he's a mythical figure, a legend, like you said. And I once heard someone say that if they made a new school Bible, Tyson would be one of the characters in it. And maybe that's true, but let's talk about Mike Tyson, the boxer. I mean, some view him as one of the greats in the sport, others not so much. So, Mike, is Mr. Tyson a top 10 heavyweight of all time?
I guess it depends how you define one of the greats. I think you could argue that he's close to the top 10, but I don't think he is. He was an excellent heavyweight during his run toward becoming the youngest heavyweight champ, which is really something. And the few defenses that he had as champion. But there's some problems. One, his opposition was just so-so. His best opponents during that first championship run were probably Larry Holmes and Michael Spinks. Holmes was still pretty good, but he was 38 years old. He wasn't the fighter that he was. And Spinks was a natural cruiserweight at best. Remember, he'd been the light heavyweight champion. Sure. Tyson never beat an elite opponent when that opponent was in his prime. Never, not once. Two, and this is just sort of my take on him, he was a front runner. I can't think of a fight in which he was in trouble and then rallied to win. The closest that I could think of was the Buster Douglas fight where he put him down late but still lost. And three, I could present this as a question. How old do you think he was when he lost his title to Buster Douglas, or do you know off the top of your head?
I'd say 23, 24.
Yeah, he was 23 years old. Now, that shocks a lot of people. But anyway, he was never really the same after that. So basically, you can argue that he peaked at 23 years old. He went to jail, he came out, regained a title, but he was never the same dominating figure that he'd been before that. So basically, in a way, done at 23. To be fair, Tyson was a really good heavyweight, really, really good for several years when, his early 20s. Quick, powerful, fierce, exciting, all the things that fans love, which is probably why they're still talking about him. I'd say you can argue he's in the top 15, and I don't think that's so bad when you consider that modern boxing has existed for more than a century.
Yeah, I think he's top 15 at worst. You mentioned how he fought. He rejuvenated division. Heck, some would say he rejuvenated the sport. So top 15 is, I think, the low end of this low bar, as far as where he is. I think he is top 10. I mean, a man became undisputed champion in less than a year. He made 9 title defenses of the undisputed crown. He beat solid champions and contenders. Were they? Yeah. Well, were they okay? Were they Joe Louis or Joe Frazier? No, but they weren't terrible. They were the best at that time. And look, and Tyson just beat them. I mean, he annihilated a lot of these guys. You talk about Tony Tubbs, who Tyson flattened in 2 rounds. Well, someone's going to say, well, who's Tony Tubbs? Really, how good was Tony Tubbs? Well, consider that 3 years later, Tony Tubbs nearly beat Riddick Bowe. He took him 10 rounds, lost a disputed decision to a prime Riddick Bowe. We mentioned Larry Holmes. Now, he was practically considered shot at the time Tyson had fought him. He hadn't fought in a few years, coming off the Spinks losses, and Tyson steamrolls him, of course, in 1988. But then in 1991, Holmes comes back and he beats a dangerous Ray Mercer. So, and not only that, but he gave Evander Holyfield a lot of problems too. I think a year or two later, in losing a decision. So perhaps Holmes wasn't entirely gone when Tyson rocked his world, and even Frank Bruno went on to win a world title, and it also gave Lennox Lewis lots of problems too when they faced off a few years after that. So, I mean, I get what you're saying. I look at it like this. You look at one thing you mentioned is, well, did he beat an elite fighter in his time? In his prime, no. Neither did Larry Holmes, for that matter.
Good call. Well, that's not true. Actually, he beat Norton in his prime. But
how good was Norton?
Well, that's a good question. I'd have to go back and look at that thing. But that's a good call on Holmes, because I don't think people realize that he didn't have a really, really deep resume either.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things. I don't think his opposition was that much better than Tyson's. Obviously he did it for a lot longer, but what does that really mean if Tyson had continued to beat on the caliber of opponents that didn't quite do it? Yeah,
Holmes was so good though.
he really was, but so was Tyson. He was a shooting star. So I think Mike is somewhere between the lower end of the top 10, and I think worst case scenario top 15. which is not the end of the world. I mean,
Exactly.
I think that's great. Is he top 3 or top 5? Or some say no. I don't see that. Now, with that said, is Mike Tyson a Hall of Famer in your opinion?
Yeah, 10 times over, he's a Hall of Famer. It's just not saying that much because the standards, especially in the past, haven't been that high where it's sort of that hard to get in. I think a guy like that who dominated the division for several years it's a no-brainer. Youngest heavyweight champ, 2-time champion, towering figure in the sport. Yeah, it's obvious.
So what would you just sort of listed his accomplishments. Do you think he gets in the Hall of Fame a lot based on his reputation and how large of a figure he was and still is, or is it just strictly his accomplishments?
I think even if you stripped away everything else, I think just his accomplishments are probably enough to get him in. Again, youngest heavyweight champ, all those knockouts, comes back from jail, wins the heavyweight title again. We could start pointing out bad stuff, but most people have bad stuff too. And I think he probably gets in just based on what he did in the ring. But I think the fact that you're such a prominent figure only helps. I mean, that's pretty much how Arturo Gatti. I hate to keep picking on Arturo Gatti, but that's pretty much how he got in. It's what he meant to the sport. I mean, the fans just loved him so much, you just couldn't keep him out of the Hall of Fame. That kind of thing.
Right, and I think in Tyson's case, his accomplishments in the ring are what made him such a huge figure. The way he did it, and he was doing it at the highest level in the heavyweight division at that time. So the impacts, he's being known in every corner of the globe, had a lot to do with what he accomplished in the ring first before it sort of turned to what he was doing outside the ring. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. We are getting closer and closer to the return of PBC, and there are a lot of big names who hopefully get back in the ring over the next few months. So we're going to take a look at these A-listers, examine likely opponents, potential bouts down the road, and some creative matchups that, may or may not come to fruition. And we're going to do it with a select list of boxers and name them in alphabetical order. Let's start with undefeated WBC World Super Middleweight Champion David Benavidez. Now, Benavidez was scheduled to face Romer Alexis Angulo in a Phoenix homecoming bout on April 18th. Obviously, that didn't happen, but I have to think that fight's still on the table, Mike. I don't see a Caleb Plant fight happening next, but I guess you never know.
I have a feeling that a lot of these guys are going to have that kind of fight, an Angulo kind of fight, when they come back and then get into the bigger fights. Although some guys are going right into big fights, so maybe it's a mixed bag. I think that Benavidez handles Angulo. I guess he's got quite a bit of punching power, but he's limited as a boxer. He was almost shut out by Gilberto Ramirez, 2018. Sorry, were you gonna say something?
No, I just thinking about it. It's certainly, you'd have to make Benavidez the heavy favorite. I'm just thinking about what's likely, right? But one thing that sticks out to me, when we had Benavidez on the podcast in February, he said he could see the Plant fight happening toward the end of this year or early next. And then when we had Plant on the podcast a few weeks ago, he said he's ready now. So, maybe that fight happens sooner rather than later. And what an epic fight that would be.
I think Plant could end up being Benavidez's main rival, assuming the first fight is competitive, and I think it would be. Maybe that's the kind of matchup I think that could evolve into a trilogy. You got a fierce brawler on one side against an excellent boxer on the other side, so I like the style matchup. Two young guys on the rise could be something really special. I lean toward Benavidez in their first fight. I don't know what you think, but I think it's essentially a 50-50 thing.
You know what? You nailed it. I mean, I don't even know who the favorite would be in that bout, let alone who I would choose to win. The thing is that even though Plant is the boxer and Benavidez is perceived as a brawler, Benavidez can also box some, and Plant can sort of dig on the inside and get down and dirty too. So it's just it's such a perfect matchup that it's got me salivating right now as we speak. I just hope it happens sooner than later. And I honestly have no clue who would win that fight, at least at the moment. Perhaps if I see a little more, there'll be some tells and some clues that will force me to make what is usually the wrong pick. Now, here's a fight that I would find intriguing. Eddie Reynoso, Canelo Alvarez's coach, says his fighter is considering Benavidez as a possible opponent for September. Now, that's a pretty darn good fight as well.
Yeah, I think Benavidez' father said that he'd have to take it, and I agree. I think if Canelo offers him that fight, I think because of the money, you have to at least seriously consider it. It's a great fight. I think on one hand, Benavidez is a physical force. I think he's extremely strong for that weight class, and I think that he would be bigger and stronger than Canelo. At the same time, it might be too early for him. He even told us a while back that that's something that he can see himself. He could see himself fighting Canelo in a few years, I think he said. But again, I don't think you could pass it up if it comes. I just think he's too young. He's only 23. I think he needs more experience before he faces a guy like that. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of when Canelo fought Mayweather. It could be a similar outcome. So I don't know. I think from a business standpoint, got to consider it. From a boxing standpoint, I don't know.
I think those are really good points. Interestingly enough, I think that also from a business standpoint, Benavidez was probably looking at it like this could be a huge fight, and I need to, if I continue to build myself up, that at some point down the line, this could be, one of those mega fights, Mexican American versus Mexican and so forth. Now, in the ring right now, even, I think it's already a great fight. I mean, Benavidez would apply a lot of pressure. He'd make Canelo work, perhaps at a pace he hasn't had to in years. He's almost slowed down in every fight in the later rounds. I feel like I've watched him, and so I think it would be interesting to see him push to the limit. Now, let's move on to the next person on our list, WBC World Middleweight Champion Jermall Charlo. Chris Eubank fought on the undercard of Charlo's title defense versus Dennis Hogan last December. We had Eubank on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and he reiterated his desire to face Jermall, I would assume, as soon as possible, and that certainly would be an explosive fight, Mike.
Yeah, Eubank's, he's always been intriguing because of the name, and after speaking to him, I believe in him a little bit more than I did before. Having said that, I still think he loses to Charlo. I just think Charlo's a level above, but I think it's a good marketable fight, and I think it's a fascinating matchup.
Yeah, I think it's an explosive fight. Both of them are gritty. Both of them hit hard. Both of them like to get in the trenches, but perhaps Charlo's skill and athleticism is the difference. I don't know. Now, what about Sergey Derevyanchenko? He's the mandatory challenger, the number one contender to Charlo's WBC belt. I think that certainly would be an intriguing bout as well.
I love Derevyanchenko against anyone. He's the kind of fighter, we saw what he can do against Golovkin. He's the kind of fighter that's going to push you to the limit, and it's going to be an entertaining fight. And even if you beat the guy, he's going to take you to hell and back. Really fun matchup. I think Charlo wins, but I think it's a really fun matchup, and he'd have to work his ass off to win that fight.
He really would. I mean, you're talking about a guy who, technique-wise, is so sound, does everything right in the ring, can really box, is a solid puncher at that weight class. We saw what he did with Gennady Golovkin. So I think an extremely dangerous fight for Jermall Charlo. Not your mandatory challenger, your normal mandatory challenger at all. And I'd love to see it. I truly would love to see that fight happen. And because of his position in the WBC rankings, it looks like it's going to happen fairly soon. So who knows? Maybe that one is next. Now, another name, too, that's possible or not, but certainly would be intriguing, would be Charlo versus who else but Canelo Alvarez.
I can't tell you how much I like that matchup. That's one of my favorite possible matchups in boxing. I don't think it's going to happen, but I absolutely love that matchup. It'd be the perfect test to determine how good Charlo is. He wins that fight. I think he's got a chance to win that fight. And if he wins that fight, the way he's perceived is completely different. It would just be huge for his career. And if he loses to Canelo. So it's not the end of the world. I'd pick Canelo to win that fight, but I think it's a good fight.
Yeah, I think it's a great fight. I love Charlo's determination, his power, the way he sets up his shots, his chin, his athleticism, his jab. So I think there are a lot of things that he brings to the table that could pose problems for Canelo. He's not going to fold easily. He's going to be so determined in a fight like that it could turn into a war or something like, Canelo, we've never seen Canelo been in. I think he'd be one of Canelo's big tests. So I love that fight as well. I love any fight that Jermall Charlo is in against a top opponent. His brother as well, and he is next on our list, the WBC World Super Welterweight Champion. And I think, based on all the chatter we've heard over these past few weeks, that he's targeting Jason Rosario, who's the unified titleist in that division, for a unification match.
Yeah, we talked about this, I guess it was the last podcast. I just love this matchup. Two talented, hard-punching guys, can hurt each other, coming off big, big victories. Let's hit it while it's hot. Love this matchup.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, another name that I think I tossed out there a couple of weeks ago, and it was a fight that a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, we thought would be the pinnacle at the 154-pound division. We saw what happened. A lot of things have changed since then, and that's Charlo versus Jarrett Hurd, the former unified champion at 154. What do you make of that fight?
I think, I'm just going with my gut here, I think Hurd still needs to build himself up a little bit more for a fight like that. He's a big, strong guy, and I think it would be a fine matchup. It's Hurd certainly wouldn't be a pushover, but I would rather see him take one or two more fights and evolve a little bit more.
I'm sure. And speaking of another person who may need to take one or two more fights, but he's already sounding the drums for a rematch versus Charlo, though it seems like Charlo's response is, didn't you learn from the first fight? And that's none other than Erickson Lubin, who fought Charlo in 2017, lost by a first-round KO, but he looks so improved, so much more mature now, working with Kevin Cunningham, the great trainer out of West Palm Beach in Florida, and he wants another crack at the King.
Yeah, you sort of hit on it. And I think he's improved quite a bit since he was stopped by Dirrell in 2017. Some you have to come back from something like that. You got to be mentally tough. And my impression is that Lubin is mentally tough. I think a rematch would be interesting, and I'm not necessarily sure it would end in similar fashion.
Yeah, I think that it's a lot more of a dangerous fight than Dirrell than it was the first time, simply because Lubin has more experience. But I don't know if the outcome is any different, at the end. But who knows? Lubin's looking really, really good. I loved what he did against Nathaniel Gallimore, and we saw what Gallimore did to Jason Rosario. So anything can happen in this wild sport, but certainly in the 154-pound division, there's so many good fights that can be made. Now, we're going to move down to the 130-pound division, where Gervonta Tank Davis is rumored to be fighting Leo Santa Cruz next. I saw his promoter, Mayweather Promotion CEO Leonard Ellaby, reiterate that on social media today. So it looks like the fight that is going to happen next for Mr. Davis, hopefully this year, and I can't wait, Mike.
Yeah, no, that's a really fun matchup. All these matchups are fun, but all these guys we're talking about are elite guys, so this is how it's supposed to be.
Right.
Leo, I still think that Leo might be too small for Davis. I guess it depends on where exactly at what weight they fight at. But I just kind of think he's going to be too small against a guy with that kind of talent. But here's the thing about Santa Cruz, though. He's going to make you work. He's going to come and come and come and come. And if Davis can't handle that pressure, he could be in trouble, even if Leo's a little bit small. I think I wouldn't. Let's put it this way: I wouldn't put anything past Santa Cruz. I really like that matchup.
Me too, and I think a lot of folks out there might be sleeping on him a little bit. The reality is that Tank fought at 135 his last fight. He did struggle a bit making the weight. He had to come back, and it wasn't the greatest performance against Yuriorkis Gamboa. And now he's got to move back down to 130 pounds to face a Leo Santa Cruz, who
I wonder if he can do it.
Yeah, and if you're not in the best of shape, Leo Santa Cruz is going to be your kryptonite. He's the absolute wrong guy to fight if you can't go a hard 12 rounds, because he's always ready to go hard 12 rounds. And based on the interviews I've seen, Santa Cruz understands what he's facing. He knows that Tank is a dangerous, hard hitter, and that the early rounds are going to be, he's going to have to be very, very careful moving around the ring, not doing anything crazy. And he's going to try and take Tank into deep waters and drown him. Now, I like what Tank's saying. We had him on our podcast last year and talking about that fight, and he said basically it's not all power. you have no idea how many skills, my skill set, how the depth of my skill set, and I'm going to show it all against Leo Santa Cruz. He's going to have no idea what hit him. Now, another great fighter who Tank could potentially take on is Gary Russell Jr. Gary Russell Jr. has been beating the drums for a big fight for a long, long time, and he has mentioned that he's willing to get in there with Mr. Davis. Now, he also said that he's not so sure that Tank's willing to get in there with him. But for the sake of this conversation, what do you say, Mike?
Interesting to see how Davis would handle Russell's speed. I think Davis has actually got pretty quick hands too. Yep. He's an athletic guy, so that it's really interesting matchup. I like that matchup a lot. Russell's also more experienced. He's got a lot of experience now. Maybe hasn't fought as much as he should, but still more experience than Davis. That's a good matchup. I don't know what would happen in that fight. I really don't.
Now here's another matchup that I'm curious to get your take on. And it's one that I don't think is going to happen anytime soon, but they've been going back and forth on social media so much that I just need to bring it up. And it's Davis versus Ryan Garcia.
Yeah, Garcia is not ready for Davis. Like I've said several times now, he's a superstar when it comes to social media, but his accomplishments in the ring haven't caught up to that yet. That doesn't mean I don't like him. I like him a lot. I think he's a tremendous prospect. I don't know if he's beyond a prospect now, but I use that term. He's a tremendous prospect. But let's put it this way: all this trash talk, maybe it'll pay off in the end. If they keep at it for a year or two, and then they finally meet, then maybe it pays off and they have a big fight.
Right. If it happens in a year or two. If it happens right now, I think it's a massacre.
Yeah. It's not. It's too early for Garcia. He hasn't beaten anyone.
He's just not ready yet. No. Now, next person on our list, 2-division world champion, none other than Danny Garcia. We've all seen the headlines in recent weeks. It's looking like it's going to be Errol Spence Jr. for Danny Garcia. Spence, the undefeated unified champion at welterweight. Huge fight, particularly given that Spence is coming off the accident in October. We don't know what he's going to look like. He was originally scheduled to fight Garcia last January. That didn't happen, but it could be a whole different ball game if they meet later this year.
Yeah, I hope it happens. I'd be happy for Danny. He hasn't had a big fight in a while. It's a really good fight for him. I'm going to assume, just for the sake of this conversation, that Spence is fine. He says he's fine. I'm going to take his word for it. I'd pick Spence to win the fight. He's probably a better all-around guy, probably naturally a little bit bigger. That's going to be hard for Garcia to overcome, but I would definitely not dismiss Danny Garcia. I've said this several times already, but I look at Garcia as a winner. He finds ways to win fights, which means he's a good, crafty, resourceful boxer. I won't be shocked at all if he wins that fight.
Yeah, not only is he a good, crafty, resourceful boxer, all of those things, but he takes a good punch and he carries a good punch in both fists as well. And I think now is the best time for him to face someone like Errol Spence Jr. He's coming off the decision win over Ivan Redkach. Not the greatest of performances. However, it was a southpaw and someone that he could sort of use to measure himself against and figure out what he would need to do against another southpaw like Errol Spence or another southpaw like Manny Pacquiao. What do you make of that fight?
I think it'd be good for both guys. For Garcia, obviously, the money and potentially what it could do for his legacy. I think Garcia wins that fight. I don't think it's a gimme. I think that it's not. I mean, he's like Marquez in a way, in that they're both counterpunchers. So I mean, Pacquiao's seen a guy like that a million times. But I think Garcia is a very, very good counterpuncher. He's younger than Pacquiao. Everybody's younger than Pacquiao. And again, I think he's a winner. So that's a good fight. I think Garcia actually wins it.
It's a tough fight. I mean, I think right now I may lean toward Pacquiao just because of his experience and his hand speed. He may be able to get in and out on Garcia, who hasn't always shown the fastest feet or the quickest fist. So I would lean toward Pacquiao right now, but it's a great fight, dangerous one for both of those guys. Now, another person who Danny Garcia may face is Mikey Garcia. We heard rumors about that fight happening last year. It never came to fruition. Maybe we see it this year, or at least within the next year.
It's an interesting fight, isn't it?
Yeah.
That screams 50-50 to me. I think I can make cases for both guys. Danny's a little bit bigger at the weight, I think, at this point, and we've just discussed how talented he is and how durable he is. I think Mikey's probably a better technician, probably a better boxer. Their power's probably similar at that weight. That's a really good matchup. I hope it does happen at some point.
Yeah, Mikey, you would think, at 147 that he wouldn't be the hardest of hitters, but his right hand is just, he packs dynamite.
Hurt Jesse Vargas.
He did, dropped him, once or two times, and really had him hurt. Might have been able to finish him off. It's a dangerous fight for Danny Garcia. He would have to utilize every single tool in his arsenal, in my opinion. True 50 fight, I don't know how that would play out. Now, Mikey Garcia is next on our list. Obviously, we've already discussed what he would do against Danny. What about Mikey versus Manny?
Yeah, I'm going to pick Garcia to win that fight too.
Really?
Yeah, I just think that one of the biggest problems the biggest problem he had with Spence was the size. Spence was just, you can't fight a guy that much bigger than you who's that good. I mean, that's just a disaster waiting to happen. But that's not the case with Pacquiao. They're both small 147 pounders, and yeah, I don't want to take anything away from Pacquiao. What he did against Thurman is amazing. But listen, the guy's 41 years old. His hands are still quick, I guess, but he doesn't sustain the pace that he could at one point in his career. He fights in spurts. I think Mikey's a really, really good clever, good boxer. I think could adapt to anything that Pacquiao throws at him. I'm not sure he's going to knock Pacquiao out even with that power, but I think that he'd make life very, very difficult for Pacquiao. I think maybe Pacquiao's best chance against Mikey is Mikey's hands aren't necessarily that quick. Maybe that would open a door for Pacquiao. I don't know, but I actually loved it. That's a really great matchup. I'd love to see that fight.
It is a great matchup. One thing I was thinking, you mentioned Garcia's performance versus Errol Spence Jr. and Errol Spence Jr. being significantly bigger than Garcia. That was his first fight at 147. However, Spence used his boxing skills. He sort of stayed away from Garcia for much of that fight.
Yeah, I know.
So, Do you think size still played that big of a?
Yeah, I think it did. I think that it's not just about boxing against a guy like. I don't think he could hurt Spence. He was Spence could push him around a little bit. I just think it was. Even if you're as good a boxer as somebody, but they're substantially bigger, I think that becomes a factor.
Now, would size be a factor if Mikey Garcia took on Keith Thurman?
Yeah, that could be. I think Mikey's better pound for pound, but I think Thurman's a big, strapping 147 pounder, a healthy version of Keith Thurman. I'm not sure we'll ever see that again. 100% healthy. I hope so. I like him. That's a tough fight for Mikey. I think that could be a bad matchup.
Yeah, I think it's a great matchup for both guys. But Keith Thurman is a bad dude, man. I think that if he puts it together, if he can whip himself into the kind of shape he was in 2016, 2017, I don't know if that fighter still exists. But I'll say it, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. That man could be the man at 147 pounds. Now, another name who could be the man at 147 pounds, someone we've been talking about, Manny Pacquiao. We've already mentioned what he would look like against Mikey Garcia, which is a potential matchup for him against Danny Garcia, another potential name for him. What about Manny versus Errol Spence Jr.?
Not going to happen. It's just too bad of a matchup for Manny. I think that Spence is a complete, big, strong, powerful 147 pounder at the top of his game. It's just not a good matchup for Pacquiao. If Manny took that fight, I would just have ridiculous respect for him. But I'd also say what I said before Mikey took that fight, that it's a mistake. It's not going to happen. They're too smart.
Now, that's pretty much what we were saying prior to Manny fighting Keith Thurman as well. I mean, we thought Thurman was going to dominate.
Yeah.
Well, we thought Thurman was going to dominate and knock him out, and that didn't happen. So perhaps we're underrating Manny a little bit. What do you think?
I think it's different. I think it's a different situation. Thurman was coming back from a long layoff. He didn't look good in his previous fight. I'm not sure when they agreed to fight Pacquiao, but he didn't look good against Josecito Lopez. So it's a different situation. Now, Spence had his accident. I'm saying everything I'm saying is assuming that he's 100%, which he says he is. Pacquiao doesn't want that fight. I don't know if it would look like the Mikey Garcia fight, but I think it would be domination on that level.
Well, I don't know if Pacquiao doesn't want that fight. However, I agree with you that they'd have to make Spence the favorite, certainly, if that fight were to ever happen. Now, the next person on our list, the undefeated IBF super middleweight champion, Caleb Sweet Hands Plant. Now, looking at Plant just fought in February against his mandatory challenger, Vincent Feigenbutz, stopped him in 10 rounds. So looking at what could happen next and at the IBF rankings, the next listed contender for Caleb Plant is Caleb Truax. So I'm thinking in my mind that that's a makeable fight while he sort of waits to see what happens with David Benavidez and if that fight happens next and so forth. But it's a fight where I see Plant dominating.
Yeah, that's an okay like interim fight. Truax is the kind of guy, he's a solid guy, comes to fight, but I just don't think he's got the tools to hang with Caleb Plant. I think Plant needs a big name sooner rather than later, but I guess under these circumstances, it would be okay to fight a guy like Truax as long as you come back in the next fight and fight somebody who's deemed a significant challenge.
Yeah, certainly. I think Truax is the kind of guy that you don't overlook, that could spring a surprise on any given night. However, looking at the two guys and where they are right now, you'd have to make Plant the decisive favorite there. Now, we've already discussed a fight between Plant and Benavidez. That's also a possibility. What about Plant versus Canelo Alvarez?
I'd like to see Plant gain a little bit more seasoning, which I think is what he also has in mind before a fight like that. I don't think he's that far off. He might have the skill set right now to push Canelo, and being a naturally bigger guy won't hurt either, back to the size thing. But I think he'd actually have a chance to win if he had a few more fights of experience under his belt.
I think he's dangerous now, just simply because of his footwork, which I think is a weakness for Canelo. He doesn't move around the ring that much. He's not the fleetest of foot. I don't know what's the deal.
Good at cutting off the ring, though.
He is good at cutting off the ring. Yeah. However, it's not like he'd be going in there against a guy who's a weak puncher or smaller or so forth. He'd be cutting off the ring against a guy who hits pretty darn hard and throws punches in combination to the head and body and could potentially sting him as good as a shot as Canelo takes. Now, Canelo's had some issues with his knees before, and I don't think he's as mobile as he once was. So I think that someone with Plant's footwork, with his size and his dimensions, with his steady jab, he could really create some problems for Canelo Alvarez even now. Now, in a couple of years, an even more seasoned Caleb Plant would probably be extremely
That's what I'm
tough
thinking.
to beat. Yeah. And it probably makes sense, even more sense then. Next person on our list, the former two-time welterweight champion, Showtime Shawn Porter. In my opinion, the fight I want to see, and I'm biased because I just saw their first fight a few weeks ago, and I'm dying to see it again now, is Porter and Keith Thurman getting it on in a rematch.
Yeah, I think I said this to you off the podcast. I wouldn't want anyone I care about to fight Porter. You might win the fight, but you'll be sore for like 8 years afterward, and you probably won't win. Right. He deserves a rematch with Thurman. The first fight was that close. Could have gone either way, especially after what he did against Spence. I think he deserves whatever he gets. That's again, assuming that Thurman is healthy, and if he's not healthy, he'd be in trouble. Assuming he's healthy and not rusty, that kind of thing, I think that's a good fight.
Yeah, I think that Shawn Porter deserves a rematch with Errol Spence too, really, if we think about it. It was a really, really close fight, and I hope that they do it again at some point. But in the case of Porter and Thurman, two guys who are coming off very close losses, both of them, I'm sure, believe they deserve another crack at the title. Probably makes sense for them to square off against each other, and then the winner steps up and does get that opportunity. One name I was thinking about for Shawn Porter, and I don't know if it's too soon, but I wouldn't mind seeing him square off against a Jamal James. Perhaps maybe not next, but at some point within the next 12 months, if James is ready to step up, I think Shawn Porter's a great test, maybe too great a test. Who knows?
When you mentioned that, I thought, wow, that's a pretty interesting idea. I wouldn't have thought of him. I think he's probably a better fighter than the one who lost to Yordenis Ugas.
Sure.
He's not a small 147-pounder. He's a good size, good strong 147-pounder. He's got that skill set. The one thing occurred to me, though, is I'm not sure he has the power to keep Porter off of him. Yeah. I'm not sure. Maybe he does. But if he has a deficiency, maybe that's it. But that's a really interesting matchup.
Yeah, I like it. And I think James took that Ugas fight on really short notice when he was a young, up-and-coming fighter. Probably a much different boxer now than he was back then. I like the fight. I don't know if I necessarily like it next. I remember Jamal James was supposed to fight Thomas Dulorme on April 11th. That fight was postponed, obviously, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. That would have been a great step-up fight, a good barometer for where he was at. So perhaps he takes on a fight like that next, and then we see if he's ready for a Sean Porter. Now, another fight that's been discussed, and just as recently as last week, I saw Kenny Porter, the father and trainer of Sean, talking about he wants his son to fight none other than WBO titleist Terrence Crawford. I think there's an outside chance of that happening, but it's something that both Sean and Kenny have mentioned wanting. So perhaps we see that fight. More than likely, we won't. Let's move on to the heavyweights. Andy Ruiz Jr., the former unified champion, is making a comeback. Don't call it a comeback. He hasn't been gone for that long. But now working with Eddie Reynoso, trainer of Canelo Alvarez, on a one-fight deal. No word on who he may fight next, but we're going to throw out some names for you first, starting off with a guy we had on the podcast a few weeks ago who's rejuvenated at a late age and believes that he is ready for another world title shot, Chris the Nightmare Arreola. Mike, what do you think of that matchup?
I like the Arreola fight for him. Chris is a tough guy. Better boxer than people realize, and he'll be prepared. As you said, he's sort of rejuvenated late in his career. But that's probably, you'd mentioned, I'll just spill the beans, you'd mentioned Ortiz and Wilder also. I think of those three, that's probably the most winnable Arreola. So I like that fight for Ruiz as a comeback fight after the loss to Joshua.
Yeah, certainly the most winnable, but perhaps not the toughest, and really depends on what kind of Ruiz we see in that fight, because based on what we heard from Arreola and what we saw from Arreola against Adam Konaski, yeah, he's going to be ready, and he's going to give everything he has. Now, Luis Ortiz versus Andy Ruiz Jr. is a great fight as well, but I'm guessing you think that it's too dangerous, or what do you think?
No, I don't think so. I'm not even sure where Ortiz is, to be honest with you. I mean, he looked pretty good against Wilder in that last fight, and then he got knocked out. It's kind of hard for me to gauge. We don't really know how old he is. He's not a young guy. He's an older guy, obviously. I don't know. It's hard to gauge him. I think Ruiz might be better against Ortiz than we think. It'd be an interesting fight.
Yeah, certainly an interesting fight. I think the age thing with Ortiz is overplayed. Obviously he fought in the amateur. Folks know how old he is. Now, that said, I don't know if you can take the kind of right hand he took from Deontay Wilder and be the same fighter afterward. That was one hell of a shot, and he didn't react too well afterwards. So I don't know. I think it's a great fight for Ruiz, perhaps not next. And of course, you mentioned the third fight on our list, Andy Ruiz Jr. versus Deontay Wilder. I still hold out hope that these two get it on at some point in the near future.
I think a focused, reasonably fit Ruiz probably has the skill set and the toughness to give Wilder some trouble. I think that might be a better fight than some people think. Another interesting matchup. I think we need to see what Ruiz looks like in his next fight, both before he gets into the ring and what he does in the ring. I think his he needs to be fit. He needs to make the decision that he's going to be disciplined and be focused on his career before we even look beyond his next fight.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if he was focused and he was fit against Anthony Joshua in the rematch, he might have retained his titles. It's really that simple. That wasn't the case when he fought Joshua, and because of that, I think it's easy to sort of overlook him. I'm with you. I think that's a great fight if he takes on Deontay Wilder. Dangerous fight for Deontay Wilder, but of course dangerous for Ruiz Jr. as well. If he thought Anthony Joshua hit him hard when he got dropped in the third round, he should... you don't want to take that right hand from Deontay Wilder. That's all I have to say. Okay, we're going to move back down in weight as we continue on this list in alphabetical order. Next up is El Terremoto, Leo Santa Cruz. Now, we've already discussed what will likely be his next bout versus Gervonta Tank Davis and what we think would happen if those two do square off. But what about Santa Cruz versus Gary Russell Jr.? That's a fight that's been tossed around for many years. Hasn't happened. We don't know if it ever will. How good would or will it be?
I think that that's a good style matchup for Leo Santa Cruz. I think the way you beat a quick, athletic boxer like Russell is you swarm him, and I think that Santa Cruz that's his style. That's what he's capable of. So I think that's actually a pretty good fight. It's hard for me to pick against Russell because of that hand speed, his pedigree, and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's a good competitive fight.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I do hope at some point that we still see that down the line, regardless of what happens in a fight versus Tank, or maybe Russell gets a shot at the winner of that fight. That would be great as well. Another person who's been calling out Leo Santa Cruz is Chris Primetime Colbert, the interim WBA champ at 130 pounds. Is it interim or super or? I don't know whatever flavor of the month the WBA has now, but certainly Colbert is been moved up nicely. He's shown skills at every single level. He feels he's ready for Santa Cruz. What do you think?
My gut tells me that's just a little too early for Colbert to face a guy like that. I think 1 or 2 or 3 more fights maybe, but I think it's a little bit too early. Santa Cruz is just polished and tough, and he's going to be all over you the whole fight. It's just a hard fight.
Yeah, I think I understand where Colbert is coming from, and maybe if he were to get that fight against Santa Cruz, he would really step up and show the kind of skills that would prove how good he truly is. And he's flashing some pretty good skills already, but I'm with you. I do think it's just too soon. And even if he truly believes he can beat Santa Cruz, why not just take a couple more fights? At worst case scenario, you build up your name a little more before you get in there with Santa Cruz, and you make it a bigger fight. So certainly something to look out for in the future. And Chris Colbert, I think, is one of the better young fighters in the sport. Next person on our list, we've talked about quite a bit already, the undefeated, unified world welterweight champion, Errol Spence Jr. Obviously, we've discussed what a fight between him and Danny Garcia might look like. I think a lot depends on what kind of Spence we see following that accident in October. We've already discussed the fight versus Manny Pacquiao. But what about the one guy it seems he can't stand at welterweight? The one person he's always makes it a point to say that he doesn't like, Keith Thurman. Errol Spence versus Thurman was a fight that at one point I thought would end up being the fight, and maybe it still happens. I still want to see it even now, although Thurman is coming off that loss. Mike, how do you see it playing out?
A lot of it depends on what happens with Thurman. If he could come back and be healthy, and that's a big if, and he maybe wins a fight or two, get back in the win column. Maybe he does give Spence some problems somewhere down the line, but it's just hard to see that happening with Thurman because he struggled for a while with injuries, didn't look good against Lopez, lost against Pacquiao. We haven't seen that guy for quite a long time, so it's hard to envision, but if he could come back and be healthy and resurrect himself to the way he was, then maybe we got a fight.
Yeah, I think he needs to. I know he had the surgery and he's had more time off. He definitely needs a fight prior to Spence. Maybe he needs 2 fights before that. And maybe Spence needs a fight or 2 before facing someone as hard-hitting and as fast as Keith Thurman, too. Who knows? I still think it's a great fight. Like I said, I love it. I'm just not sure that it happens next. But I do hope that at some point they settle their rivalry in the ring. Next person on the list is Keith Thurman. We've discussed every potential bout for him already, so we're going to move to the last name, certainly not least, former WBC World Heavyweight Champion Deontay Wilder, the Bronze Bomber. I think we all want to see a third fight with Tyson Fury next. Obviously, there's nothing else on his itinerary.
It's an interesting situation that he's in. His fate is in his hands. If he beats Fury, he's
literally
back. If he beats Fury, he's back on top. If he loses, especially if it resembles their second fight, he'll have to battle his way back. I really don't know what's going to happen. It's kind of hard to imagine him turning the tables after the emphatic nature of the second loss, but you never know. We see crazy things in boxing all the time. And he seems to think that he can make adjustments. He knows what he did wrong and so forth and so on. So a lot of eyes will be on that fight. I want to add one more thing, though. If it turns out that Fury has a Wilder's number, that's okay. Guys have struggled against a particular fighter and have still had good careers. Wilder could lose to Fury again and still have a lot more success going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also think there's a great chance that he could beat Fury in a third fight. You know, I was thinking about this earlier and recalling the second fight with Ortiz where he just sort of took his time and set it up and then landed that one right hand and went home. But the younger Deontay Wilder was a lot busier, threw his jab more, worked basically, wasn't simply looking for that right hand. And I love the way he sets guys up, but I do recall how the other Deontay would set it up while winning rounds. And I think that in a third fight versus Tyson Fury, he's going to have to get back to doing that. Not just looking for that one punch, but working the body, throwing the jab out there and trying to win rounds and while looking to create opportunities to perhaps end it early. But either way, I think that fight's next before anything else. And can't wait to see it. Hopefully it's this year. Hopefully we can all get back to watching fights. And if not, whenever we see it, I'm sure we're all going to love it anyway. So that concludes our toe-to-toe segment for this week, which brings up our next interview, a 4-division world champion, one of the great names in the sport, the Filipino Flash, Nonito Donaire. Nonito, let me say first, welcome to the PBC family.
I'm ecstatic and excited. Thank you.
That's great to hear. I have to ask, what was the thinking behind the move, or how did it come about and so forth?
Well, me as a person, I'm always just been the kind of person that is big with loyalty with me, and in my previous relationship with Richard Schaefer, we became really good friends, and I respected the man, and he's great at what he does. So, it was just a move where I felt comfortable being with him, and he's always guided me. So wherever he made a decision to, I kind of followed with it.
Nonito, you were scheduled to face Nordine Ubali, I think it's pronounced, prior to the current pandemic. Is that still the plan for you?
I hope so. I believe so. I mean, nothing is really certain at this time.
Nobody knows anything.
They gave me, so it was for May 16th, and it just went out the window. And they're trying to figure out what's going on with boxing and how they're gonna go on in the next phase in doing it. So I'm hoping that it's still the same thing, and I'm still kind of training for that.
An old rival of yours, Guillermo Rigondeaux, has moved back down to 118. Is there a part of you that'd like to fight him again and avenge your loss to him?
You know me, man. I'm a fighter. I'll fight anybody, but mainly this is my territory. So, I'm excited with that one as well, the thought of it.
That's why we brought it up. You've also got Luis Neri, Brandon Figueroa, Stephen Fulton, a division above at 122. Would you consider moving up for any of them, or do you plan to remain at 118 for a while?
I definitely can move up to 122, but there's an unfinished business that I'm trying to handle with 118. Again, I felt that this is my territory. Temporarily, it's not mine. So that's my game plan is to take over it all over again.
Now, Nonito, you moved back down to 118. You had a great run in the World Boxing Super Series, and you gave Naoya, in a way, the toughest fight of his career. Was it sort of bittersweet to show the world that you're still elite, yet come up short?
It's definitely a big learning lesson for me to understand where I am mentally and how to get myself back in there. And I think that was the biggest experience for me, to see where I'm at, but to realize where I can be. It's not so much as, in life lesson, it's always a bittersweet. You always have that taste of bitterness and the experience of it was being the underdog, and people telling that I couldn't last for a round or four, and then I give them a hell. It was sweet to be that way, and that's why we're pursuing the takeover whenever boxing opens up.
Well, can you elaborate on that when you say the takeover?
Well, the experience that I have in that fight, I know that I have a lot of gas in my tank.
Right.
Yeah.
All it is just the inspiration and the motivation to go to be in the gym, and hanging the poster up in the gym and seeing that face when I wake up in the morning. I think it's a better motivation for me, and um and that's the game plan. Try to take over the world, try to take over the division. Because again, that was an experience that I felt that, man, I got a lot in me, and it's just I just gotta do it. You gotta stop making excuses, stop making stories.
It's funny. You said after the fight that you were getting back in the gym to make some changes, but particularly on your mindset. Is that what you were referring to as far as the motivation and so forth?
Definitely, that's something that I think is the biggest key factor, especially from my experience and what I've been. I mean, the 20 years in boxing, professional boxing. It can drain a lot of your motivation, but I was very motivated after the fight. Because I know what I have left in me. I have a lot left in me, not just power, not just speed, but just the overall aspect of an elite fighter. So all it is was just tweak the mind and get the body going. That's pretty much what I came down after the fight. We came in to the gym and try to get that mental aspect of motivation and inspiration to kick in the 2020. At least that was the game plan.
Did you know before the fight how much you had left, or did you maybe have something to prove to yourself in that fight?
I knew I had a lot something left, because I mean, when I spar, when I train, I felt really good. And even I even promised my kids, I'm bring that trophy to you guys. Because I felt that I was in tremendous shape. I felt that I was in great mind, body, and spirit. I felt unstoppable. And one thing that I realized in that fight was I was pulling my trigger. I was pulling my trigger to try to instead of like when I was younger, I just go. It wasn't even the thought of it, pulling the trigger. And in that fight, I realized where my trigger was, and I just kept holding on to that trigger and never pulled that trigger. And that's something that I was working on coming back into that fight.
Interesting. Yeah, everybody raves about that guy. What were your impressions after the fact?
Well, I've fought everybody, and when I see him, when I look at fights, I dissect the fight. I look into where their foot or their feet is their stance and the way they turn their body, how I can pretty much break them down in where their power is. Where can I smother the power? Can I use counter and stuff like that? And I saw that counter that I was trying to land and that hurt him. I knew that was something that he was susceptible to. And that's pretty much how I look at things. Is just studying things. I'm pretty smart in looking at how fighter works.
That actually leads me to my next question. Obviously, you proved you have a lot left in the tank, but at the same time, the body changes over time. You're 37 now. What adjustments have you had to make in terms of training and fighting and anything like that, or is it pretty much the same as it always has been?
Well, we did a lot of sprints instead of the long distance now. A lot of and Rach, my wife, is the one that heads the training for that. We do a lot of sprints, a lot of fast twitch body movement. But ultimately, when it came down to sparring, I only sparred maybe once or twice a week. A lot of it, we did a lot of sparring. If I spar a good sparring one in Monday, I'll probably do a drill sparring where we're working on jabs, we're working on something that we're not trying to kill each other. But there's 1 day or 2 days in a week, if I'm not happy with my performance, to do more sparring. But usually I hold on to the sparring as much as I can. But a lot of running, a lot of body work and stamina and endurance.
Interesting. So this is kind of a big question, but in the big picture, what else would you like to accomplish in the sport before you decide it's time to walk away?
Well, I think I'm gonna be able to do it. In this division is to become the undisputed champion of the world. That's always been my goal, and that's always gonna be my attempt to before I hang up the glove.
Ever imagine to be at this level for this long? It's pretty amazing if you stop and think about it.
Never thought about it, man. I just always kind of keep moving forward, and wherever my body feels that I can do or cannot do, then that's where my answer lies down. So, but the last fight really proved to me that I got a lot left. Again, the mental strength is the old man's game of being in top. So that's where I'm at right now. It's just the mindset is in tremendous shape right now. I just got to get the body into it now.
Nonito, you mentioned you've been in the sport professionally at almost 20 years. You've experienced the highs and the lows of boxing. Is it anything like what you expected when you first turned pro?
Nope. You turn pro, you just want to fight. You just want to fight. You just want to get up there. You want to get to the top. But you don't get to deal with the politics. You don't know what the politics goes into it. You don't know the deal of negotiation. All of that stuff. I mean, it's a big world behind the boxing world. And I'm grateful that my wife and the people behind me has done well.
Now, with that in mind, what advice would you give to the younger generation looking to accomplish what you've done?
Get to the top, work. Don't think that just because you have a name doesn't mean that you can have everything. That gets you to a level of complacency. You got to run. When you get to the top, you still got to run. Life never stops. But if you're, I've seen a lot of guys nowadays when they think that, I should earn this much or I should earn that much, and earn your credit before you start speaking that you earn this or you earn that.
All right. It's great advice no matter what you're doing in life, right?
Exactly. That goes into everything. It's easy to be complacent. It's easy to get familiar with everything else that you lack the motivation to be better, and this is why I think I am such in the level that I am, is because I never stop growing.
All right. Now, one other thing, Nonito, because your work obviously expands beyond just the ring. So one other thing we wanted to discuss, our understanding is that in an effort to curb the spread of the coronavirus, you and your wife, Rachel, who I believe is spearheading this initiative, have been giving out protective equipment in the city of Las Vegas. We'd like to get more information on that if possible.
Well, first, Vegas and the way the world works. I mean, I think that it's time to kind of get things together, and my wife can speak a lot about that because she understands a lot of it, and I'm just helping her out the best that I can with it. But her compliance team and all this other stuff, she can talk all about that stuff.
Sure, that'd be great. That'd be great if you could.
Yeah, let's talk to her.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Rachel, how's it going?
It's going great, I mean, as best as we can do in this time. We always try to make stuff easier for our community and for people around us and, of course, our nation. So right now, basically what happened, of course, everybody knows when coronavirus hit the U.S., there was a very huge shortage in personal protection equipment. And then we were starting to see, the trends of, which states and which counties were opening quicker, what were the regulations, what was mandatory, what was recommended to help the spread. So on a national level, of course, we strive to understand each of the state's requirements so then we can provide to those states to open safely. As far as in Las Vegas, we have a warehouse that is called The House, fondly by our whole team. And we strive to stock that and have things available for a walk-up. If you're a small business or a big business, a lot of these businesses aren't knowledgeable in the products that are being required and mandated by our state to use. So, for example, we went out last night downtown Las Vegas. There weren't certain requirements that were being upheld. Now, the scary part of that is of course, Corona will be rampant through those places. In addition to people won't be protected. But again, we're talking about restaurants that never use PPE. We hear all the time about how people are using the 3-ply mask, and they're using it incorrectly, or they're taking it off, putting it on a contaminated surface, going to the restroom, coming back, now the mask is on. Now the virus is on their mask. They touch their face. They don't know how to discard properly. The use of gloves. If you're not in the healthcare industry, a lot of people don't really understand cross-contamination, and unfortunately are aiding in the spread instead of reducing the amount of spread. So what we're doing is not just providing for Las Vegas, but being the experts in compliance. We have a compliance team that comes around and we assess a business based on all the logistics of their whole operation and the physical mandates that are required. For example, coming into any facility, you're supposed to have, if you don't have a sink right next to the door, which most people don't, you have to supply somewhere that they can immediately sanitize their hands. My mom went into a lawyer's office, same thing, and it's just the lack of direction and knowledge. So after we already run through what products they need and the frequency that they need these products, if they need us to take it a step further, our compliance team does have an employee and employer onboarding on how to use PPE effectively, and also how to discard and any of the other problems that they'll have. We just onboard their entire team, so the knowledge is not something limited, and it's something that raises their business to, prosper on their own and really give them the ability to open Vegas stronger.
See, I can explain that.
What's it? People in other cities, it's kind of hard to gauge what it's like in another city. What's it like there in terms of the coronavirus? It's kind of weird because it's just always hustling and bustling, and it's a ghost town now, right?
Right now, it's a ghost town. Of course, when you think of Las Vegas, a lot of people think about the Strip. When the Strip closed, it really was like an eerie ghost town. I think there was a Resident Evil movie that was based in Las Vegas, and I swear that's how I felt. Friends like Jesse Vargas were going on the Strip and taking pictures that we would never be able to take in an open economy. So it was eerie, but Vegas it's an interesting town. I mean, the fact that we came from the Bay Area, California, and it's very heavily dense populated. Traffic is crazy. And when you wanted to see your friends, like you knew it was going to take like an hour just to go to the location to see them. And you had to think about that when you were making plans. In Las Vegas, the community is very, very community driven. We do everything together. We have neighbors that will help out, and we communicate a lot. Even if you work on the Strip, like if a local goes on the Strip, most of the time they'll call a friend. They're like, yeah, of course, come in. We'll take care of each other. And it's very evident in this time that people are talking to each other. It's like, hey, for example, like a mom and pop might not be able to purchase a pallet of gloves, but the price point is different based on quantity. They will reach out to their sister companies or possibly the other companies on the same block that are mom and pop, get the order together and purchase the order together. So it's not, there's not as much as it really is a kind of hustle town. It shows in the community that, we're all gonna, if we can all help each other, then Vegas will be that much stronger when everybody comes in.
What's the feedback been like? What's been the response to those you've been reaching out to and the entire community?
As far as PPE or
Yep.
as far as like the coronavirus?
Well, as far as your initiative, yes.
As far as our initiative, they're extremely thankful, and just the fact that we're connecting everybody. They, first of all, they love the fact that we have the house in town. A lot of their problems were, sourcing material, even just hand sanitizer online. You were lucky to find something that would give you one hand sanitizer, 1 liter, right?
Right.
And then you're at the mercy of shipping. And at that point, if your business is going to sustain opening, you can't have that loss, right? Like, hey, tomorrow we're going to run out of hand sanitizer. What do we do? Close the entire weekend until we receive our shipment? We offer that emergency stop, that one-stop shop for everyone. And in addition to the fact that we're very versed in the compliance of the state, OSHA, FDA, and CDC, they ask us questions, and we're always more than willing to help. And with the questions that are being asked, like, they're just like, wow, thank you, because if any of those government agencies come in and find non-compliance, they are threatened with either closure of their business again, and or a huge fine. Nobody wants that. We're only going to be stronger together. So it's for us, like, I'm like really grateful that they come to us and I can help them with something that they don't have knowledge on. I think knowledge is power, and the best way is to empower them by giving them the knowledge.
Now, how can people hear or read more about what you're doing?
So we have a website. It's a retail space. It's called nationalppe.co. That's a retail space based off of one-offs. But of course, if they decide that it's a wholesale account nationwide, then they will go to the wholesale portal of the same site and then be able to purchase orders from there. And after that, they would be able to email us if they had questions and concerns. Of course, as I stated, if it's a different state, our compliance team will have to pull up those records for those states and then be able to advise accordingly.
What inspired you to get involved?
I think I was really hard on myself in the beginning of the coronavirus. So just to rewind, when one of my friends on February 29th had told me, he's like, hey, this thing's not going away. It's a little bit scary. You might want to stock up on material. And I was like, okay. And I kind of brushed it off, but kind of didn't. I, was previously in the military, and I used to have a huge tote full of just canned foods, non-perishable items that if anything happens, I can just pop open a can and eat it. So the next day, me and my husband had gone out and we prepared. And for absolutely no reason, just preparedness, not for us. I could sustain not eating, but for our kids, right? And just so happens that when I landed in Cabo on March 11th with my girlfriends, I got a call and text message from Nonito saying Vegas is going crazy. Everyone's going nuts at Walmart and Costco. And of course, he didn't have to go because I had stocked prior, right? So when I got back from Cabo, I think me and my girlfriends were kind of in shock and not knowing, we kind of missed that whole couple first days of the madness that was in Vegas. And it was really, really sad to see, what was happening. After about 2 weeks of being in fear, I realized that we had to do something. And there was no real person that you can look at and say, okay, she's actually doing the research. She's getting certified in XYZ to understand more. She's, trying to spearhead this so then we can open faster. And from there, I just don't I think this goes to show with any fighter, they don't like operating out of fear. You operate out of fear, you do things that are not normal of your pattern. Yeah. So we take that approach of making sure that, hey, let's operate out of foresight, making sure that we know, like, futuristically, where should we want to be as an economy and how do we get there? And getting there is being able to have the supply on hand, being able to predetermine what's the next move of government. And we show that was possible when our governor had decided that on Wednesday that the restaurants could open at 50% capacity on Friday with XYZ mandates. And we were able to open up a lot of the restaurants in compliance within 48 hours.
Wow, that is great news. We love to hear what you're doing. We hope people check that out. For those who need that information, again, that's nationalppe.co, I believe. Rachel, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Nonito as well. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We wish you and your family health and safety during these times, and we look forward to having you guys back on again soon.
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
You too.
Bye-bye. It's really good to hear from Nonito Donaire. Excited to see what he'll be doing in the coming months, and just fascinating and amazing the kind of work he and Rachel are currently doing during this time of crisis. Again, that's the nationalppe.co if you want to check out the website. I understand they're handing out stuff for gyms too, so for those boxers and trainers and others who need equipment, check out the website, reach out to those guys, because I think they're doing really, really great stuff. Now, that concludes our episode for this week. We want to thank Nonito and Rachel for joining us. We want to thank Andre Dirrell as well. And as always, most of all, we want to thank you guys for tuning in. Be sure to check us out next week for more boxing talk right here on the PBC podcast.